My beloved brothers and sisters in Islam, Alhamdulillah, we begin by praising Allah, the Lord of the worlds. We send blessings and salutations upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad, his family, his companions, and those who follow his path with sincerity until the day of judgment. Today I want to share with you a moment in our history that didn't just change the course of events, it changed the understanding of victory itself. And that moment was the day of Karbala, led by none other than Husayn ibn Ali, the beloved grandson of the Prophet Muhammad. Husayn ibn Ali was not just a figure in history, he was a beacon of light born into the most blessed household on earth. He was the beloved grandson of Prophet Muhammad, the son of Ali ibn Abi Talib and Fatima az-Zahra the daughter of the Messenger of Allah. From the moment he opened his eyes, he was embraced by the warmth of divine guidance. He grew up in the lap of the Prophet, who would carry him on his shoulders, kiss his forehead, and make dua for him. Imagine a child being raised in an environment filled with revelation, surrounded by the noblest of characters, watching the best of creation live, speak, and teach. This was the world of Husayn. He was not just any child in Medina. He was from the Ahlul Bayt, the purified household, mentioned in the Quran. Allah had chosen this family for something special, and Husayn carried that responsibility with dignity, wisdom, and strength. As he grew older, he developed the deep traits of his father Ali, the bravery, the intellect, and the unwavering stand for justice. But he also carried the tenderness of his grandfather, his love for people, his humility, and his dedication to Allah. The Prophet did not merely love Husayn, he honored him in front of others. He once said, "O Allah, I love him, so love him, and love those who love him." This is no ordinary praise. This is an invitation for every believer to hold Husayn close to their hearts. It's a reminder that loving him is part of loving the Prophet. But with that love came trials. Husayn lived during a time of change, turmoil, and political confusion. After the passing of his father and then his brother Hassan the Ummah found itself in a fragile state. When Yazid, a man known for his corruption and disregard for Islamic values, came to power, Husayn was asked to give his allegiance, but he refused. Why? Because Husayn understood what that allegiance meant. It was not a mere political signature, it was a stamp of approval. And Husayn knew that if he gave in, it would send a message to the Ummah that morality could be compromised for convenience. Here's where his character shines most. He could have stayed in Medina and avoided conflict. He could have lived a peaceful life and watched from the sidelines. But how could the grandson of the Prophet remain silent when injustice was rising? How could the torchbearer of truth sit back while the values of Islam were being twisted? Husayn knew that sometimes the price of truth is everything, and he was ready to pay that price, not for power, not for fame, but for Allah. His refusal was not out of rebellion or a thirst for leadership. It was out of a deep sense of amanah, a trust he carried from the Prophet to uphold the dignity of Islam. He once said, "I did not come out to cause corruption or oppression. I came out to seek the reform of the Ummah of my grandfather." He left Medina quietly and went to Mecca, but even there, he realized he was being watched and perhaps targeted. He knew that the sacred space of the Kaaba should not become the scene of bloodshed. So he moved again, this time toward Kufa, where he was invited by many Muslims who promised support. But things changed rapidly. The political climate turned, promises were broken, support vanished, and yet he kept moving forward. He knew what was coming, but he remained firm. Why? Because his mission was not about worldly victory. His mission was to awaken the soul of this Ummah, to remind it that dignity, truth, and principle are more valuable than comfort or safety. Karbala was not just a location on a map, it was a turning point in history. It was where truth stood up against falsehood, even when falsehood had the swords, the armies, and the control. Husayn ibn Ali redefined victory for all time. He taught us that winning isn't about defeating your enemies in battle. Sometimes it's about staying true to your values when the whole world abandons them. Sometimes it's about dying on your feet rather than living on your knees. He taught us that the real success is to live for Allah and to die upon truth, even if the world considers you defeated. And today, over 1,000 years later, the name of Husayn is still remembered with love, honor, and reverence. His sacrifice is still alive. His blood speaks. His courage inspires. And his legacy continues to guide the hearts of those who seek to live with integrity and faith. Husayn ibn Ali was a man whose moral compass was perfectly aligned with the values of the Quran and the teachings of his grandfather, the Prophet Muhammad. Every decision he made, every word he uttered, and every stance he took was rooted in a deep consciousness of Allah. He wasn't driven by power, politics, or personal gain. He was driven by truth, integrity, and a profound sense of responsibility toward the Ummah. His heart beat for justice, and his actions were a reflection of a soul that feared nothing but the displeasure of Allah. When we look at the events surrounding the rise of Yazid, we must understand the context. Yazid was appointed as the ruler through hereditary succession, a move that was unprecedented in Islamic governance at that time. It marked a shift from the system of shura, consultation and selection based on merit, to a monarchy-like transfer of power. This raised deep concerns among many companions and scholars of the time. Husayn, being from the Ahlul Bayt and a leader of immense influence, was approached to give bay'ah, allegiance to Yazid. This was no small matter. It wasn't just a political formality. Giving allegiance would have meant endorsing a leadership that lacked moral authority, Islamic justice, and righteous conduct. Husayn knew the weight of this decision. He wasn't reacting emotionally. He wasn't being reckless. He thought deeply, consulted those around him, and made a conscious choice to withhold his allegiance. He famously said, "A man like me does not give bay'ah to a man like him." This was not arrogance, it was principle. Husayn understood that Islam was not to be diluted by political convenience. If the family of the Prophet gave in, what message would that send to the Ummah? What would future generations learn from that compromise? He was not standing against one man. He was standing against an entire system that was beginning to drift away from the prophetic model. He saw the moral fabric of society beginning to tear. He saw truth being silenced and injustice being normalized. And in that moment, Husayn knew he had to take a stand, not for his own sake, but for the sake of every believer who would come after him. His silence would be seen as approval. His agreement would be interpreted as surrender. But his resistance, his refusal, would echo through the ages. What is remarkable is that Husayn didn't rely on public pressure, nor did he seek fame for his stand. He knew very well that the consequences could be dire. He understood the reality of facing an army without sufficient numbers. Yet, he chose to uphold truth, even if it meant isolation. He lived the verse of the Quran, "O you who have believed, be persistently standing firm in justice, witnesses for Allah, even if it be against yourselves or parents and relatives." Surah An-Nisa 4:13-5. In today's world, standing up for what is right can be difficult. There is often a cost. People may label you, isolate you, or even oppose you. But Husayn taught us through his actions that the price of silence in the face of injustice is far greater. His moral compass was unwavering. It didn't shift with public opinion. It wasn't swayed by fear. It was guided by the light of the Quran and the Sunnah. Even before Karbala, the character of Husayn was known to be soft-spoken, kind, and generous. But when it came to principles, he was unshakable. His gentleness never meant weakness. He was firm where firmness was needed, and yet he remained merciful, even to his enemies. This balance of justice and compassion, of strength and humility, is what made his stand so powerful. He could have accepted Yazid's rule and avoided conflict, but that would have meant giving legitimacy to something he believed was wrong. His refusal to compromise his values should inspire every believer to evaluate their own moral compass. Are we standing up for the truth in our lives even when it's difficult? Do we speak out against injustice when we see it in our communities, our workplaces, our homes, or do we stay quiet to avoid discomfort? Husayn showed us that a believer's loyalty is first and foremost to Allah, not to positions, not to politics, not to power. His example reminds us that true honor lies in standing for truth, even when it seems that no one is standing with you. When he made his decision, Husayn knew it could cost him his life. But he also knew that compromising with falsehood would cost the soul of the Ummah. He chose the path of sacrifice, not because he wanted to die, but because he wanted Islam to live. His moral compass didn't point towards safety, it pointed towards sincerity, and that is why his name remains written in the ink of honor, and his stand continues to illuminate the path of the sincere. When Husayn ibn Ali made the decision to leave Medina, it was not a decision made in haste or rebellion. It was made after deep reflection, consultation, and prayer. He was not someone who acted based on emotion or desire for conflict. Rather, he was a man of knowledge, patience, and prophetic insight. The situation had reached a point where remaining silent would have meant compromising truth. Remaining passive would have given legitimacy to a leadership he believed did not uphold the values of Islam. So Husayn Ra, with a heavy heart but a clear conscience, began a journey that would become one of the most significant moments in Islamic history. He first traveled to Makkah. He hoped to find a place of safety, a sanctuary where bloodshed would be unthinkable. Makkah is the most sacred place on earth, a place where the spilling of blood is forbidden. There, pilgrims were gathering for Hajj, and the city was full of people. Husayn Ra thought perhaps he could speak to the hearts of the people, perhaps they would support his cause, perhaps the injustice rising in the Ummah could be addressed through peaceful dialogue. But even in Makkah he was not safe. Reports began to reach him that Yazid's agents were planning to assassinate him. Yes, even in the sacred land. He could not risk the sanctity of the Kaaba being violated. He could not allow blood to be spilled in that holy place. At the same time, letters began pouring in from the people of Kufa. Hundreds, then thousands of letters, all promising loyalty and support. They begged him to come to them. They said they would protect him, that they needed his leadership, that the people were ready to stand for justice. Husayn Ra, while cautious, felt a responsibility to respond, but he didn't rush. He sent his cousin Muslim ibn Aqil ahead of him to assess the situation and verify the sincerity of the people. Initially, Muslim was welcomed and received with warmth. The people pledged allegiance to Husayn Ra through him. It seemed like the situation was favorable, that Husayn Ra might actually be able to bring about change without war. But the politics of the time were unstable. The governor of Kufa, upon learning of Muslims' arrival and the people's support for Husayn, responded with fear and brutality. The atmosphere quickly changed. The same people who welcomed Muslim now feared for their own lives. One by one they abandoned him. Eventually, Muslim ibn Aqil Ra was captured and executed. Husayn Ra was still on the road when he received the news. Imagine, he had already left the safety of Makkah, trusting in the promises of the people of Kufa, only to hear that his trusted envoy was gone and the support had vanished. Many companions and family members advised him to turn back. They urged him to reconsider. They warned him of the danger that lay ahead. But Husayn Ra understood that turning back now, after all that had happened, would not just be a personal retreat, it would be seen as a moral collapse. The world was watching him. His every step was a symbol. If he turned back, people would believe he had accepted Yazid's rule, that he had lost hope in resisting injustice. And so he continued onward, not out of recklessness but with full knowledge of the sacrifice ahead. He reached the desert plains of Karbala, where he was intercepted by the army of Yazid. He was given two choices, submit or die. Subhanallah, imagine the grandson of the Prophet, the one whom the Prophet used to carry on his back during prayer, now being told to surrender or face death. Yet Husayn Ra remained composed, dignified, and faithful. He tried to negotiate, to reason, even to ask for safe passage back, but the opposition was not interested in peace. They had been ordered to take his allegiance or his life. Still, Husayn Ra refused to give in, not out of pride but because he knew that if he, a man of such status, gave allegiance to tyranny, it would open the door for future generations to accept injustice as normal. His mission had gone beyond political correction. It was now a stand of conscience. He was surrounded, outnumbered, and cut off from water. He and his family, including women and children, endured days without access to the river. He watched his loved ones grow weak with thirst. Yet, not once did he waver in his trust in Allah. This journey to Karbala was not just a physical one, it was a journey of the soul. It was a walk toward martyrdom with eyes wide open. It was Husayn's Ra way of saying that sometimes, in order to preserve the spirit of Islam, a person must be willing to give up everything in the dunya. He was not marching to victory in the worldly sense, he was marching toward eternal victory, the kind that inspires hearts, wakes up nations, and redefines what it means to live with purpose. The plains of Karbala stood silent and dry, bearing witness to a tragedy that would etch itself into the heart of Islamic history forever. When Husayn ibn Ali arrived there with his small group of companions and family, he was met not with hospitality, but with siege. The army of Yazid, numbering in the thousands, surrounded them and began the cruel strategy of cutting off access to water. Under the scorching desert sun, they were denied the basic right to drink, even though among them were women, children, and even infants. The banks of the Euphrates flowed nearby, yet those closest to the Messenger of Allah were left to suffer from thirst day after day. Despite the overwhelming odds and unbearable conditions, Husayn remained calm, steadfast, and connected to Allah. His heart was firm, and his mission was clear. He was not there to seek war, nor did he provoke violence. He continued to call for peace, to try and awaken the humanity of the opposing side. He reminded them of who he was, the grandson of the Prophet, the son of Fatima, the beloved of the Messenger. He asked them if it was just to fight him, a man who had committed no crime, who was merely refusing to endorse tyranny. But the hearts of the enemy were hardened. They had chosen allegiance to power over allegiance to truth. One by one the companions of Husayn went into battle. They knew they were outnumbered. They knew they would not survive. Yet each of them fought with the courage of lions because they understood the purpose behind their sacrifice. This was not just a battle of swords. It was a stand against moral decay. Every drop of blood they shed was a testimony to their refusal to live under falsehood. They fought not for conquest, but for conscience. Among those martyred were some of the most beloved to Husayn his nephews, his cousins, his closest supporters. His own sons went out to defend the truth, including Ali al-Akbar, a young man who resembled the Prophet in both appearance and character. When he fell, Husayn stood over him and made dua, tears streaming down his face, yet his heart remained surrendered to Allah's decree. He did not complain. He did not lose hope. He knew that their deaths were not in vain. They were planting seeds that would grow into an eternal lesson for generations to come. And then came the most heart-wrenching moment of all, the martyrdom of his infant son Ali Asghar. The baby had been crying from thirst for days. Husayn took him in his arms and walked toward the enemy lines, not with a sword but with a plea. He lifted the child and asked, "If you have no mercy on me, then at least have mercy on this child." But the response was brutal. An archer released an arrow that pierced the baby's neck, killing him in his father's arms. In that moment, Husayn looked toward the sky and said, "O Allah, bear witness to what they have done." He could have despaired. He could have cursed them. But instead, he turned to Allah. This is the true power of Husayn's sacrifice. It was not just about resisting oppression. It was about maintaining dignity, patience, and unwavering faith even when everything was being taken from him. His body was in pain, but his soul was at peace because he knew he was fulfilling his duty to Allah. Eventually, Husayn was the last one left. Tired, wounded, thirsty, and grieving, he still stood firm. He went into battle alone, defending himself with incredible bravery. But the army finally overpowered him. He was struck multiple times and fell to the ground. Even in his final moments, he recited the Shahada and turned his heart to his Lord. They did not just kill him, they mutilated his body and severed his head. But what they could never sever was his message. The sacrifice at Karbala was a turning point for the Ummah. It reminded us that truth must be defended, no matter the cost. It taught us that real victory does not lie in worldly survival but in staying true to the values of Islam. Husayn could have chosen comfort and safety, but he chose eternal honor. His blood was spilled, but his legacy lives on forever. It is because of this sacrifice that his name is remembered with tears, love, and respect by believers all over the world. Through his unimaginable loss, Husayn gave life to the soul of the Ummah. He reminded us that Islam is not just about rituals and words. It is about standing for justice, protecting the weak, and living with courage and truth, even in the face of death. When we look at Karbala through the lens of the world, it may appear as a moment of tragedy, loss, and defeat. Husayn ibn Ali the noble grandson of the Prophet, was surrounded, starved, betrayed, and ultimately martyred in the most brutal fashion. From a material point of view, there was no army saved, no land gained, no treaty signed. His companions were killed. His family was taken captive. His body was left in the dust of the desert, while his head was paraded through cities. If we judged by worldly standards, we might say he lost. But Islam does not measure success the way the world does. Islam redefines victory, not by the outcome, but by the sincerity, by the truth upheld, and by the nearness to Allah maintained. Husayn showed us that true victory lies not in the preservation of life, but in the preservation of principle. He stood, knowing full well what would happen. He understood that facing an army with a handful of companions would not lead to political success or worldly dominance. Yet, He moved forward because he saw something greater than victory on the battlefield. He saw victory in standing for what is right, even if the entire world stands against you. The Quran speaks of those who remain firm on the truth and face hardship with patience. Allah says in Surah Al-Imran, "Do not think of those who are killed in the way of Allah as dead. Rather, they are alive with their Lord, receiving provision." Husayn did not die in defeat. He lived eternally in the honor of martyrdom. His soul was raised while his message continued to descend upon the hearts of generations to come. This is the kind of victory that outlives empires, that echoes beyond the battlefield. Victory in Islam is not always about immediate results. Sometimes it is about planting the seeds of change, even if you don't live to see them grow. Husayn was not just trying to correct a political wrong. He was trying to wake up the Ummah, to shake its conscience, to make it feel again, to bring it back to the path of justice and piety. He sacrificed everything not so that he could sit on a throne, but so that the message of the Prophet would not be used as a tool by tyrants. He gave his life to make it clear that allegiance to falsehood, even under pressure, is unacceptable in the life of a believer. He showed that silence in the face of oppression is not neutrality, it is complicity. He chose the pain of loss over the guilt of compromise. And in doing so, he reminded the Ummah that sometimes the price of truth is high, but the reward is eternal. When he stood in Karbala, with the enemy in front and the desert behind, Husayn was already victorious. Every moment he resisted, every word he spoke, every prayer he offered on that lonely battlefield was a declaration that no tyrant, no matter how powerful, could control the hearts of those connected to Allah. He was free, even in chains. He was honored, even when humiliated, because he lived and died for a cause bigger than himself. He died with the name of Allah on his lips and the banner of justice in his hand. This is the spiritual dimension of victory that Karbala teaches us. It tells us that when you stand for truth, even if you are alone, even if the world calls you a failure, in the eyes of Allah, you are a winner, because Allah is not looking at the outcome. He is looking at your intention, your sacrifice, your patience, and your trust in Him. Husayn teaches us that you don't need numbers to be on the side of truth. You don't need power to have honor. All you need is sincerity and courage. In his stand, he exposed the reality of Yazid's regime not by speeches or debates, but by the clarity of his sacrifice. The world saw that the grandson of the Prophet was willing to give everything rather than endorse injustice, and that revelation struck the Ummah like lightning. It awoke the hearts of the sleeping, it shamed the hearts of the silent, and it reignited the flame of resistance that could not be extinguished. His victory was not written with ink, but with blood. And that blood gave life to the soul of Islam. That blood reminded us that this deen was not meant to be inherited like a kingdom, nor corrupted by greed, nor silenced by fear. It was meant to be lived with truth and defended with courage. Karbala redefined victory in the most profound way. It showed us that standing with Allah, even when you fall to the ground, is greater than standing with the world while losing your soul. Husayn fell on the earth, but he rose in the heavens. And through his fall the Ummah stood back up. The story of Husayn ibn Ali and the sacrifice at Karbala is not just a chapter of history to be recited in mourning or admiration. It is a mirror held up to the Ummah. It forces every believer, in every generation, to ask a difficult question: where do I stand when truth and falsehood collide? Karbala is not just about what happened in the past, it is about what is still happening today, within us, around us, and in the choices we make every day. It is a lesson, a standard, a test, and the Ummah must continue to learn from it if it hopes to carry the light of Islam with honor and dignity. One of the most powerful lessons from Karbala is the value of standing up for justice, even when it is dangerous or unpopular. Husayn did not wait for the crowd. He did not rely on the majority. He acted based on what was right in the sight of Allah. Today, many people remain silent in the face of injustice because they fear being isolated, criticized, or harmed. But Karbala reminds us that truth is not dependent on numbers. One man, firmly grounded in faith and morality, can shake the conscience of an entire nation. One person who refuses to bow to falsehood can leave a legacy that outlives armies and kings. We must ask ourselves, when we see oppression, whether in our communities, in politics, in our homes, or in workplaces, do we speak out or do we turn away? When we see people being wronged, do we stand with them or remain neutral because it's safer? The Prophet said, "Help your brother, whether he is the oppressor or the oppressed." When asked how one could help an oppressor, he replied, "By stopping him from his oppression." Husayn Ra lived this hadith. He not only refused to support oppression, but he gave his life to stop it. Another critical lesson is the importance of maintaining integrity even when the price is high. Husayn Ra had the option to compromise. He could have pledged allegiance, lived in comfort, and avoided all the pain. But he knew that protecting the soul of Islam meant refusing to validate injustice, even if it cost him everything. In our time, we are often tempted to compromise our values for acceptance, convenience, or success. Whether it's in business dealings, social interactions, or personal choices, we are constantly being tested. Karbala teaches us that honor lies in refusing to sell your soul, even when the pressure is immense. Karbala also teaches us about patience in the face of suffering. The trials Husayn Ra faced were not just physical, they were emotional, spiritual, and deeply personal. He lost his children, his brothers, his friends, and his dignity was attacked. Yet, he never cursed, never gave up, never blamed Allah. He remained patient, turning always to his Lord. This level of sabr is something the Ummah must reflect on. In times of personal loss, in moments of humiliation or trial, are we turning to Allah with trust, or do we fall into despair? Karbala reminds us that even in the darkest hour, the believer holds on to hope and remains firm. Moreover, the unity of the Ummah depends on people who are willing to sacrifice their ego for the greater good. Husayn Ra didn't fight for personal gain. He wasn't seeking position or revenge. He moved because he feared what would happen to the Ummah if evil leadership went unchallenged. Today, our communities are often fractured by ego, pride, and division. We argue over small matters. We break bonds over minor disagreements. Karbala teaches us that the Ummah survives when we prioritize truth, justice, and unity over our own desires. The cause must be bigger than the self. And finally, Karbala reminds us to always be people of action, not just emotion. Every year, Muslims remember Husayn Ra, often with deep sorrow and tears. But his life calls us to more than mourning. It calls us to movement. He did not die so that we would merely cry. He died so that we would live with purpose, courage, and moral clarity. His sacrifice was meant to ignite something within us, a sense of responsibility to uphold the values of Islam in every part of our lives. Each of us has our own Karbala, a moment where we must choose between what is easy and what is right, between comfort and conscience, between fear and faith. And in that moment, we must remember Husayn Ra. We must ask, what would he have done? Because he showed us that Islam is not just a religion to be believed, it is a cause to be lived, defended, and if necessary, died for. The legacy of Husayn ibn Ali Ra and the tragedy of Karbala is not limited to a date on the calendar or a region on a map. It is a light that continues to shine across centuries, across lands, across hearts. It is a legacy that refuses to fade, because it was never built on power, wealth, or empire. It was built on truth, sacrifice, and sincerity. What happened on the 10th of Muharram was not the end of Husayn Ra. It was the beginning of a movement that continues to awaken the conscience of the Ummah. Generation after generation, Husayn Ra did not live to see the fruits of his sacrifice. He did not see justice prevail in his lifetime. He did not return to Medina with victory banners or cheering crowds, but his legacy has reached places his feet never walked. His stand on the barren plains of Karbala has inspired reformers, scholars, leaders, and ordinary believers to stand against tyranny, to speak for the voiceless, and to value principle over convenience. This is what makes his story timeless. The world may forget kings and conquerors, but it never forgets those who stood for truth with sincerity, even when they stood alone. Karbala has become a symbol of moral resistance. It is remembered not just by Muslims, but by people of all backgrounds who value integrity and justice. In every place where injustice tries to silence truth, Karbala speaks. In every heart that wrestles with fear while longing to do what's right, Husayn Ra whispers courage. His legacy reminds us that one person connected to Allah and devoted to righteousness can change the course of history without ever holding a sword of conquest. His martyrdom sent a message stronger than any army could have delivered. That truth can be attacked, but it can never be defeated. The lessons from Karbala ripple through time. When scholars stood up to corrupt rulers, they were following in the footsteps of Husayn. When communities chose patience and steadfastness over compromise, they were drawing from the well of Karbala. When individuals gave up status, wealth, or popularity to remain true to their beliefs, they were echoing his spirit. His legacy has become a guiding flame for all those who face moral crossroads. It teaches that real power is not in dominance but in devotion, that true honor is not in winning battles, but in standing on truth even if you fall. The remembrance of Husayn Ra keeps the Ummah spiritually alive. It reminds us not to become numb to injustice or indifferent to wrong. In a world where distractions are many, and truth is often buried under noise, the story of Karbala cuts through with clarity. It tells us, do not accept falsehood just because it is powerful. Do not abandon truth just because it is lonely. Do not let fear replace faith. These reminders are not just emotional, they are essential for our moral and spiritual survival. Even in his death, Husayn Ra was victorious. His sacrifice exposed the falsehood of the regime that killed him. His blood purified the message that was being hijacked for power, and his family, though taken captive, carried the torch of his message forward. His sister Zainab Ra, in chains and grief, stood before rulers and declared the truth with unshakable resolve. She proved that the mission of Karbala did not end with swords. It continued with words, with witness, with patience. Today, when we remember Husayn Ra, we are not just honoring a man, we are renewing a commitment to justice, to honesty, to standing firm in the face of pressure. His legacy challenges us. Will you speak the truth when it costs you? Will you choose the right path when it is hard? Will you live for Allah, not for the approval of people? These are the questions Karbala places before every believer. This legacy also unites the Ummah. While Muslims may have different views, schools, and cultures, the love for Husayn Ra brings hearts together. It reminds us that we are one in our love for the Prophet and his family, one in our desire for justice, one in our longing to live with purpose and die with honor. His name softens hearts, moves tears, and awakens the soul. That is the power of a life lived entirely for Allah. And so Karbala is not just a story to be remembered, it is a call to action. It is a mirror in which we see our own struggles, our own responsibilities, and it is a promise that those who live for truth will never be forgotten, and those who die for justice will never truly die. The legacy of Husayn ibn Ali Ra is a light that will never be extinguished, because it was lit with the flame of sincerity, and Allah Himself is the guardian of that light.